get to see her himself. Well, Quetzal shows up 2 days later on Saturday because Semjase had blinked out on Thursday night. It's now Saturday, and Quetzal comes to find out exactly what had happened. And the tone of his voice is very serious, and Billy's immediately kind of alarmed and says, well, what's going on? What's happening? And he starts to explain to Quetzal all about what happened. And Quetzal says that, well, after she beamed out of the room, she didn't show up back at the base, and they were very concerned. Well, they went looking for her and found that Semjase was floating in her ship above the center. She had a broken arm, she was in a coma, and her skull in the back of her head was greatly damaged. And matter of fact, she was so close to death that Quetzal was very, very alarmed. He immediately informed Ptah and rushed Semjase as quickly as possible back to the planet Ira to see what he could do for her. Ptah is trying to do something because it seems to be beyond their science, so he puts a call out to Ascot, since their race is far more advanced, to see if something that actually they could do. Well, the chain of events goes on that Billy doesn't hear anything for several days, and he's quite concerned. And then on Wednesday, December 21st, after several days, which is his 96th contact, suddenly he's contacted by someone he doesn't know. It's a Pleiadian man called Isedos. And he goes to see Isedos, and Isedos apparently has come to bring him a message about Semjase. And Billy's very upset. And he said, well, who are you? I don't know you. And why have they sent somebody I don't even know? Days have gone by here. I haven't heard from Quetzal. And why haven't they informed me of what's going on? He's very nervous about what's happened to Semjase. And Isedos begins to tell him, well, calm yourself, and I'll explain about what's going on, and blah, 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 that Semjase's okay. And Billy just flies off the handle. He says, I know she's not okay. Who do you think you are coming here and giving me this information? I know a lot better than that. I've projected myself back to the planet Ira to see for myself. And Isedos is very taken aback by this. He's, you have projected your consciousness back to Ira? I was not informed that you had these abilities. I thought you to be a very primitive and ignorant person. And Billy gives him a short lecture about, he's just crawled out of the jungle and he's not quite as silly as a monkey. And then he has those abilities, and he proceeds to tell Isedos all that he has seen. He tells him that he projected his consciousness, astral projection, back to the planet Ira to see what has happened to Semjase. He sees her in a glass box in what looks a room sort of like a hospital room of some kind, and she's laying there frozen, completely dead in this glass box. That her head is in some sort of horseshoe device that's transparent. And he explains all this to Isedos and says, so how can you become telling me here that everything is okay when I've seen for myself that she's dead? What are you talking about? And Isedos apologizes to Billy for assuming he was so ignorant, and he's very surprised that Billy was able to do that. And he calms him down, and he assures Billy that he has come to give good news, that Semjase is alive and she's well. Billy says, well, how could this be possible? And he says, well, Semjase was frozen in that state that you saw, Billy. You were absolutely correct, but you did see that she apparently was dead. Pleiadian technology allowed them to freeze Semjase in a particular state that prevented the spirit from actually separating from the body. Even though there was medical death and severe brain damage and no brain waves, that they were able to stop it right at that point in hopes that Ascot's technology might be able to do something. Well, what actually happened was, he said, was that Ptah got in touch with Ascot. Ascot said that no, it was too far gone for their technology, but she got in touch with another race of people who had the technology to do something about it. They immediately just transmitted themselves into the operating room on Ira. These men came in, I guess you'd call them doctors, or we'll call them that. They came and they did something very, very unusual. They brought with them kind of an artificial plasma. They then took the dead part of the brain out, took the skull cap off, took the dead part of the brain out that had died out, and they put this artificial plasma back into Semjase's brain and put the skull cap back on. Within a few moments, Semjase was sitting up on the table out of her coma and was seemingly herself again. But 42 hours had gone by that she'd officially been dead, and she, of course, had no reminiscence of any of this and didn't know what really had happened. Well, it was explained to her that these people that had done this were called, they were Sonas, and so they would be called Sonians. And what they had actually done is this artificial plasma somehow that they have brought back served to work as a synthetic kind of brain. This plasma then attaches itself to the brain. It emulates the natural electrical force or life force of the being itself, and will for 3 or 4 years then work as kind of an artificial brain until the natural brain will start to recognize it as a natural part of itself again. So, through whatever complicated means this was, somehow Semjase's life was actually saved by use of this plasma, and she's back on her feet. And Quetzal reports that she will have to stay at Ira for about 3 months for a period of convalescence, that part of the doctor's orders are that she not work and she not use her brain for any new information. She's supposed to take it easy. So Quetzal returns then on the 97th contact, which was the following Wednesday, December 28th. A week later, Quetzal comes back and is very apologetic to Billy, and he's, of course, reaffirming all the things that he's learned from Aisedo, and apologizes to him for not being a little bit more careful with Billy's emotions. And he also was surprised that Billy had the ability to astral project to Ira and see for himself. Well, it's explained to him that Manera and Pleiadian will help Quetzal continue with the mission, and because Semjase won't be able to come back for about 3 or 4 months. And Billy has a couple more questions about how this is possible that this plasma could work. And Quetzal just kind of runs over it again, that yes, that the brain itself has within it the electrical, or what's called the cosmical life force. When a being comes into life, that there is a force of energy in each being that keeps us alive. There is a life force within us. And this cosmical life force can do many things. It provides the impulses for life and nourishment, but there's something that it can't do. Apparently, the brain itself can send information to an immune system to correct most everything, but these impulses are not capable of curing the brain itself somehow. So what this plasma does, it's actually a foreign body inside of the brain, and eventually the body will catch on to the fact that it is a transplant. It'll catch on to it, and it will be destructive to the brain. So this artificial plasma, these Sonian guys have figured out some way to emulate the natural cosmic energy that's inside of Semjase. And they specially prepare or program this plasma so it will be compatible with the life force inside of Semjase and not be rejected for about 3 or 4 years, while the natural body's functions, the brain itself will slowly take to this plasma and make it a natural part of itself. In other words, it'll regrow that part of its own brain. Pretty amazing, huh? Well, Billy asked if they had this ability, then they could probably just keep creating new brains all the time and live forever. Is that true? And he says, before Quetzal can even answer that, Billy answers it himself. He says, no, I can see why that would be wrong. That wouldn't be possible, because that, of course, would interfere with the natural ability of creation to evolve through sleep periods. That at some point, the spirit is going to have to rest. And Quetzal agrees and says that's true. If you technically keep pushing the body, which you can through longer and longer life duration, at some point the material part of the body will give up, and the brain will the guy will become an imbecile, and the spiritual self would just go stagnant, and it would force itself into sleep. You can only push it so far. Billy had a question about the Sonians. Quetzal said he really didn't know too much about them. They were from the Tao universe. Their average lifespan was about 2,360 years. They were 175 centimeters tall. They, unlike us, they had a much larger head, about 50% larger than us, with long skulls. And they were about 4,000 years in advance of the Pleiadians, technically. They had evolved to the point where their mental abilities were so powerful that they no longer used flight machines to move around the universe, that they were actually able to transmit themselves just by force of their own mind from the Tao universe to Ira. So these are some pretty developed guys. At the end of this contact, Billy wants to know if the 30-kilometer limit on his travels is still in force that Ptah had set on him, and Quetzal says, no, it's lifted, but you want to be very careful. There was a question about the home planets of the Pleiades. Billy wanted to know, he says, do you actually live in the Pleiades that we look at? Semjase had mentioned something about having to make a dimensional shift. And Quetzal said, I'm surprised that you picked up on that. We didn't want to tell you about that until 1979. But he says, yes, the Pleiades that we live in are actually in a parallel dimension to the Pleiades that you look at in the sky. The Pleiades that you see in the sky are not suitable for life for us, so we can't live there. The parallel world that we live in is a solid world just like yours, because Billy was concerned that they may exist in some sort of other etheric state on their own planet. But he says, no, we are we are material beings just like you, living in flesh and blood, and the parallel dimension that we live in is also solid just like yours. Quetzal also commented to Billy that there are other forms of life in other dimensions. For instance, on planets where there is flora and fauna, that there are also elemental beings. These are beings who exist in a higher vibrational level than we do. They make no effort to contact us. Their role within nature is that they are connected somehow to the flora and the fauna of a planet. There is no way to acoustically talk to them or telepathically reach them, but it is possible some people do perceive them, but we can't really communicate with them. The 99th contact comes up on Wednesday, January 4th in 78, so we're almost in 3 years here now. And this is a rather sad one because Quetzal has some bad news that he and the others have decided that they've been very disturbed by all the problems in Billy's group, and they're deliberating very seriously about stopping the contacts. It just doesn't seem to serve their interest any longer, and they're very disappointed that the group members are unable to really act responsibly with all the information and help Billy. So they say they've come to the conclusion that the people of Earth are just having too much trouble understanding the truth. And so maybe it's a good time to actually stop the contacts. Quetzal says maybe it's possible they should only continue having contacts for those who believe in or who are very sincere. But then he comments to Billy, if they stop the contacts, it would be a very bad thing for the planet Earth, because if the contacts stopped and the mission stops of developing spiritual guidance leaders with the members of the group, then he fears the prophecies of the future would probably come true, which could mean a very dark time for the planet Earth. And this would really be a shame, because if the members of the group would just understand how important this was, and if they could just open their minds up to the truth, then all this could really be avoided. Well, Billy pleads for those who have been sincere. He understands that many people have difficulty, and for some people, it's very difficult for them to understand all this information and learn it as quickly, perhaps, as the Pleiadians are expecting. And he starts to get a little frustrated and upset, and he's coming on to Quetzal about, you guys are very pushy. You have a lot of nerve coming down here demanding this and demanding that and pushing us so hard. We're doing the best that we can. And the people are working very hard. They're making a very good effort. And it was your forefathers to begin with that caused all of these problems, and you should make a little bit more effort to try to, help us with our difficulties. You need to develop patience, and possibly you just don't understand humanity as well as you really think you do. And he gets rather upset, and he says he's had enough, and he just wants to go home. He doesn't want to talk to Quetzal anymore. He just wants to go. And he makes a very valid effort. Actually, in the contact notes, there's quite a speech he gives on the defense on behalf of humanity and how we really do have to learn our own and don't be so impatient with us. Well, Quetzal understands a little bit, but Billy doesn't want to talk anymore. He says, let me out of here. I will feel better when I don't have to see you anymore. And immediately goes to the hatch and just leaves the ship. Well, their next contact, which is the 100th contact, Friday, January 6th, Quetzal apologizes. He was very moved by the things that Billy said about Earth humanity, and he apologizes. He doesn't actually apologize. He just says, we realize that we don't understand as much about you as we thought we did. For us, it is a continual learning process also. Please remember, we're not superhuman. We also make mistakes, and they kind of, make up a little bit, and he decides that the contacts will go on, but that Quetzal is still very upset by the action of the group, as well as Ptah and the others are, because there are so many difficulties, egos, and jealousy springing up in the group that really there is no progress as far as the mission is going on, and it's turning out to be just more and more difficult for Billy to hold things together all the time, as well as it's taking a very terrible